everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Our friend Daniel Schmachtenberger is here. He's going to do, we're having a session on something called the Health Index, and I'll let Daniel explain that in a moment. Yeah, Daniel and I were chatting on things for him to do at the Stoa, and he posed this one and one on the pitfalls of kind of engaging in X risk, which I think is next week or the week after, and I'm quite excited about that one as well. So how today's going to work, we're here for 60 minutes, but we might go over to 75 minutes. And Daniel's going to share his thoughts, and then we'll have a conversation at the Stoa. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'll call on you, unmute yourself. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that because this will be on YouTube. So that being said, Daniel, welcome back to the Stoa, my friend.
Peter, it's good to be here with you. Thank you. It's good to see everybody. Shall we just dive right in?
Yeah. Do you want me to prompt you with the question or?
Either way, we can just dive right in.
I just hand the Stoa to you when you're here, so I'm happy to do whatever you like.
Thanks, man. Yeah, this is there's a topic that I've been thinking about that I thought would be interesting to share. This definitely was the environment I wanted to share it because it's very much at the intersection of personal development, relational development, and societal betterment. And it's also a topic I haven't talked about publicly before. So it's just kind of exploring a thought experiment together. It seemed like a good place to do it. And we're introducing it as if we were going to think of a better metric than GDP or whatever the other proposed metrics are for the health of a society or civilization. It's a very deep question, actually, to say, what is a healthy civilization? There's environmental metrics, there's happiness metrics, there's health metrics, there's progress metrics, there's educational metrics. To really answer what is a healthy, good civilization, you have to answer what is a meaningful human life and what is meaningful human life in total, and how is the civilization actually fulfilling on that. So the metric of success and the existential values are very related. And I think everybody knows that optimizing for something like GDP is not a very good success metric because GDP goes up when there's war and military contracting goes up. It goes up when addiction goes up and people spend more money on getting their supply. When people are more sick and spend money on healthcare, GDP goes up. So there's a lot of places where GDP can go up that are maybe good for the supply side and really bad for civilization as a whole. And there are a lot of alternative indices where we maybe look at Gini coefficients and national happiness indices. And all of them have some good consideration and then are also missing some stuff. If I tried to make some way of optimizing for happiness, are we defining happiness in a kind of Buddhist sense that is very disconnected from the nature of desire and is more like contentment? Or happiness in more of a Western sense that has more to do with kind of a creative passion? Those are very, very different. And what about optimizing for the happiness of sadists? Or what about the short-term happiness that comes from addiction? And so you can start to kind of think about when you're benefiting one value, what are other values that can be harmed? And there's this important insight that almost everything that values lives in a dialectical, almost everything that is worth valuing lives in a dialectical relationship with what seems like a nearly opposing, but it's really a complementary value. And so there's some kind of balance is the beginning way of thinking about it, but higher order synthesis is kind of a better way of thinking about it between the values. Individualism by itself run amok looks like social chaos and low coordination and coherence. Collectivism run amok looks like oppression. Civilizations fail on both sides. And so, of course, we have these age-old political debates about communism versus capitalism, libertarianism versus socialism, the political left and political right that are taking values that obviously have to be in relationship with each other forever. And instead of saying, how do we best create a dialectical synthesis between individualism and collectivism, we have it fight as if one of them could possibly win, which is nonsense. And so when we're thinking about success metrics, we have to think about whatever thing we value, what also has to be held in dialectic relationship with that. And that's on one axis. Then there's lots of axes, right? I would say that for everybody who's kind of thinking about how do we design a better future, if you do your own experiment, your own thought experiment of what are some indices that I think might be good indices for a healthy civilization? If we were going to optimize for anything, what would it be? Like, do that as a thought experiment, because it's meaningful and you kind of mine your own sense of what is the good life, what is meaningful, what is a good civilization. Then you have to think about where would optimizing for that metric actually create problems? What are the failure modes? Where is that thing, even though it's valuable, not sufficient? And what might we have to add? And then you get to start thinking about the interconnectivity of things. And there are, there's a lot of classic dialectics. Individual and collective is one. Immediate term and long term is another one, right? Do we want to optimize for the rate of progress, even if it is through creative discontent where everybody's miserable now, but there's lots of progress happening? Or do we want to optimize for the state of the quality of life now, even if it maybe has very low progress? Well, obviously there's a relationship between how do we have progress towards dissatisfaction forever is not that interesting. A kind of content that creates stasis rather than evolution is not that interesting. Is there a higher order synthesis where the fulfillment with life leads us to want to add to it creatively? So oftentimes thinking about the relationship between those things gives you a higher order insight. Oh, my progress doesn't have to come from discontent. It can actually come from a sense of the fullness and beauty of life that I want to add to. And now all of a sudden the progress metric and the near-term metric don't seem like they're opposed at all. One of the nice things about thinking of synthesis is you end up realizing that things that seem dichotomous are sometimes actually better optimized together. They're more synergistic. One metric I have proposed that is an interesting one to think about for the health of a society and some other points is an inverse correlation with addiction in the society. The more total types of behaviors people have addictive relationships with, the more consequentiality those addictions have on their life, the more intensity, the further the distribution, the earlier they start in life. The aggregate of all that would be a hard thing to measure, would be an inverse correlation to the health of a society, because it's an inverse correlation to the health of the individual, psychological, physical, relational health. The person experiencing compulsion rather than choice in ways that harm themselves that they wish they didn't. Obviously, the movement into more sense of freedom and agency to make the choices that are aligned with the life we want is correlated with quality of life. So these are just examples of indices that are maybe not ones you automatically think about or hear often, but that are kind of interesting. So there's one in particular I wanted to construct today. And we honestly could have talked about it as just an interesting model, not as a societal index. And we could have talked about it as a way of measuring the health of a relationship or the health of a community or the psychological health of a person. It's kind of fractally true at these various levels. I'll make a caveat and say, I don't think any definable metric should be optimized. I wrote a piece a little while ago, maybe we can put in the link here when it goes onto YouTube, called The Dance of the Tao and the 10,000 Things. And it's specifically about this. But the first verse of the Tao Te Ching, where it says, the Tao that is knowable is not the eternal Tao, right? The knowledge that's knowable is not the eternal Tao, not knowledge, the Tao that is speakable is not the eternal Tao. The Tao that is optimizable is not the eternal Tao. Optimization means that I can define it in terms of a fixed number of metrics, and then I can run some weighted optimization algorithm across those metrics. And we can see, just like GDP ends up being good for some things, but quite perverse for other things, So then I can try to add some other metric to it. We can see that any metric set, if I optimize for it, there's some things that are valuable that are outside of that metric set that end up being harmed by how I optimize for those things. And there's kind of a Gödel's incompleteness theorem here, in the same way that there's a kind of fundamental infinity to math. There's a kind of fundamental infinity to what is meaningful, where any finite definition of it ends up being less than it actually is. And so I would almost say a definition of wisdom, one interesting definition of wisdom is the difference between what an AI running an optimization function on a fixed number of desirable metrics comes up with as the right choice. The delta between that and what the actual right choice is would be wisdom, which means that it has to include that. It includes rationality and the consideration of all those metrics, but it's not limited to it. The includes and transcends that part, which is able to factor something outside of the existing metric set. It's able to recognize it. That's something like discernment and wisdom that matters. And if anything, that's another way of saying, what if we could optimize for something, we would optimize for that. That's another metric at the level of civilization. So the reason I bring this up is to say this model I'm about to propose, I wouldn't optimize for because it's missing stuff. So I'm not offering it as a complete thing. I'm offering it as an interesting enough thing that it's worth thinking about as one of the central things. And we can talk after we construct it about what it's missing. Okay, so without further ado on the model. So people have heard here probably of mirror neurons, this kind of sympathetic effect where there's a pretty automatic reaction that happens for most people where they feel some kind of sympathetic experience with other people, they feel some element of what they would experience if they were experiencing a thing themselves, watching someone else go through it. So you can flinch if you see somebody else getting hit. You can start laughing if you see somebody else laughing. So there is a coupling between our emotional state and the emotional state of someone else in this case. And so we can feel happiness associated with their happiness. We can feel pain associated with their pain. I would say there's a whole bunch of questions about mirror neurons. And rather than really tie it to the neuroscience of mirror neurons that is still evolving and is probably wrong, whatever I'd say about it, I'm going to use it as an analogy more than a mechanistic description. It's probably the case that process mediated by mirror neurons or whatever evolved largely as to serve group selection, that humans were a necessarily tribal species, a group species, where individual sapiens don't do well on the savannah. They don't do well at all, right? Like they don't make it outside of being in a group. So the cohesiveness of the group is how they succeed in hunting and protecting themselves and all those things. So we over-focus generally on individual selection, who's the alpha and what makes the person individual. And we do that because we've created a world today where we don't recognize who the tribe is because everyone is fungible. I can get everything that I need from this abstract thing called the market, and I can put something into the market to be able to get the dollars to get what I need, which was largely a way of abstracting relationships to make it seem like we don't need each other. But obviously our life depends upon other people. We've just tried to make it pretty distant. This is also, though, why there's ubiquitous loneliness and mental illness. And a basis for so much addiction is because the addiction is trying to fill a void that was largely because of being tribal people. And so for a tribe to function well, it's not based on a huge amount of in-group rivalry. It's based on a huge amount of in-group cooperation. The in-group cooperation is facilitated by this mirror neuron kind of phenomena of, if I'm hurting when you're hurting, then I'm not going to hurt you. Right? Which means that as a tribe, I can trust you more and we're going to get along. You can trust me more. We're going to get along better. If I feel good when you feel good, then I'm more invested in helping you out. You're more invested in helping me out. And we get higher cooperation, and higher cooperation ends up being pretty central to the thing we think of as the unique advantage of sapiens, right? Our language and our division of labor and whatever are kind of higher orders of cooperation. And so our emotional coupling with each other helps that. Now we can see that people will have this with an in-group and have the opposite of it with an out-group, right? So we feel pain when somebody in our in-group that we love is feeling pain. We call that compassion or empathy or sympathy or something like that. But sometimes we even feel joy when someone in the out-group feels pain, like as the form of vengeance or a kind of joy and a sense of justice or rivalry or whatever it is. And so we can see that we can have mirror neuron type relationships, right? We can have positive coupling of our emotions and other emotions, and that facilitates anti-rivalrous or cooperative behavior. We can also have decoupled or even anti-coupled emotional responses, which leads to rivalrous behavior. So if people are familiar with stuff that I talk about, the movement from rivalrous to anti-rivalrous dynamics being not just important, but necessary under exponential tech is one of the things I talk about a lot, because rivalry leads to tribal warfare and conflict and things like that, right? Conflict of various kinds. Obviously, when we move from stone tools to Bronze Age tools and then to Iron Age tools, that conflict gets capable of killing more people at bigger distances. When it moves to an exponential tech mediated world, you can't run exponential conflict on a finite planet and keep running the planet. The damage scope of the conflict gets too large. So anti-rivalry or bust is pretty fundamental. You don't get to run exponential rivalry. So thinking about this thing, who should be the in-group? Who should be the out-group? Well, if everybody has access to exponential tech and any in-group uses force against them, it drives an arms race where they then figure out how to reverse engineer that tech, make it stronger, use it back against you. As long as we keep doing in-group, out-group dynamics at any level, left, right in the US, China, whatever, we are on a path towards self-induced extinction. So we have to find a way of having a coordinating basis that doesn't require an out-group as the thing we're creating an in-group with respect to. So if we didn't out-group, could we have that tribal mirror neuron kind of thing with everybody, right? Could we actually have a positive coupling of our emotions with everyone? So I want to construct the core of this thing is, we'll describe like 4 words or 4 things. There's this axis, a pain, pleasure, happiness, unhappiness axis inside of people. And we were describing that it can be positively coupled with somebody else. So if you're feeling some kind of pain or negative emotion, I'm feeling something that's painful in response. It means I give a shit, right? Like I have some investedness or connection or skin in the game to your experience. So we would call that sympathy or empathy or compassion. On the positive side, if you're doing well, if you're succeeding, if you're progressing, if things are going well for you in life, and I feel happy for you, that thing that we think of as empathetic joy, it's important to acknowledge that we don't have a word for that in English. Like we make words for concepts that we use. The idea of feeling joy at the joy of others, it's actually a core precept in Buddhism. Mudita is a Sanskrit term for empathetic joy, feeling delight at the delight of others. It's considered of the 4 virtues to cultivate, the kind of subtlest and highest of all the virtues. And we don't have a word for it in English because it's a phenomena that we don't even think about or focus on enough to make a word for it. The polyamory community had to make up a fake word, and it's compersion. And so the term compersion, they held being the kind of the opposite of jealousy, and specifically in a sharing intimate partners, which was the common opportunity to feel jealousy, actually feeling happy for the happiness of others, even when it involved romance. Because it kind of got popularized there, I think the term came out in the 70s, it has been extended, or we can propose extending it because English has no other word, for compersion not being unique to a romantic context, but in general, feeling happiness at the happiness of others, feeling joy at their success, delight in their delight. So I'm going to use compersion that way, and it's expanded definition. So we have one axis that is the compassion compersion axis. And the compassion compersion axis as my emotional state is coupled with your emotional state. I want to see you doing well. I feel better when you're doing well. I don't want to see you doing poorly. I feel something painful. That doesn't have to mean codependent, that I'm totally fucked up if you're feeling poorly, because that's not helpful and then I can't help. But I feel something that's resonant. Okay, so the compassion compersion axis. That's if our emotional states are coupled. If they're completely uncoupled, there's no relationship at all. Whether you're suffering or happy makes no difference to me. My suffering or happiness has nothing to do with yours. That's maybe what we would think of as sociopathy, just a complete decoupling. And so you can be totally suffering and I can be totally joyful if I happen to be joyful about it. In this case, I don't want you to feel suffering. I just don't care what you feel, right? It's just a state of apathy, of not giving a shit. And as a result, I don't want to hurt you, but I'm happy to hurt you if that gets me something I want. But hurting you would be not the terminal end in and of itself. It would be a means to some other end that I care about. That's the uncoupled state. And we can see that it is quite destructive. We can also see that, unfortunately, most people feel that way about most other people. There's a lot of people in the world suffering today and you don't give a shit about it because you don't know, or they just had the greatest success of their life and you don't give a shit about it. So you notice that the Buddhists, because of this idea of mudita, are cultivating compassion and compersion, mudita, right, for all sentient beings in the universe. How do I bind myself with the self of all sentient beings? And that is really thinking about them. Wow, some kids are in sex slavery right now. Some animals are in factory farms. Some, like, how do I think about the greater world? How do I bind myself to it? And it's from there that the vow of the Bodhisattva arises. How do I become of greatest use to all sentient beings, not just myself? Because myself, what is best for me and what's best for all sentient beings is the same when I bind myself to all of them. In the same way that what's best for me and what's best for the tribe evolutionarily is the same. We just extend the tribe to all sentient beings. There's the Sanskrit saying, the world is my family, right? It's that kind of idea. Okay, so now what about anti-coupling, reverse coupling? My positive emotions are coupled to your negative emotions. My negative emotions are coupled to your positive ones. Me having negative emotions coupled to your positive ones is what we would think of as jealousy, or envy, or negative comparison, or any of those types of things. Like if you're doing well, fuck that guy, man. You know, like I'm actually feeling jealousy or I'm feeling envy. I feel something negative at your success or at your happiness. We think of this as quite normal in our society because we have conditioned it based on a society where second place is the first loser, and everything is based on competition on the same finite metrics. And from the time of, little kids, we're conditioning them to rally for a sports team where we're super happy when these guys win and give no shits at all. In fact, feel happy about the other guys losing. And we could just as easily be rooting for the other team. We're training ourselves to be able to couple to a tribe and anti-couple to another tribe emotionally, which is really good for supporting warfare. But it's important to understand that this jealousy, envy thing is, of course, natural to humans, but it's not inexorable to humans, meaning it's not something that we're just stuck with no matter what. There's a natural proclivity to be able to condition that, but it gets conditioned. And it's also possible to have cultures that condition something very different. So when you look at the Maswa people, an indigenous group in China near Lulu Lake, if you look at the Canela people in the Amazon, you see people that have pretty much no jealousy, almost no jealousy show up in their culture. And when it does happen, it's a tiny phenomena that someone just kind of recognizes and corrects for. Would be shameful for it to be anything else, but they have a whole culture that's conditioning a different set of things. Now you'll notice these cultures don't have private ownership of property like lots of tribal cultures don't. They're all sharing everything. Well, that means that they don't have a primary concept of mine related to private property. What does jealousy mean if I don't have mine as a foundational concept? right? If there's a ours as a foundational concept, we are all sharing our resources as a tribe and sharing access to things. But you see that we condition mine into little kids. The reason it's almost like one of the first words many little kids say, because they were watching their parents and everybody on TV say it, because of a mindset that was so oriented around possession and possessiveness and advancing through getting more things. So we think of it as natural because it's been ubiquitously conditioned. Here's where I would offer Krishnamurti's famous quote, that it is not a good measure of mental health to be well adjusted to a profoundly insane society. So most of us are pretty comfortable with the idea that the people who were feeling like, who were celebrating and rejoicing at the lynching of slaves as a form of entertainment, like that they were fucked up, they're psychologically fucked up people, but they were everybody in a culture at a time. They didn't think of themselves as psychologically fucked up. So we're like, is it possible for a whole culture to have a shared psychopathology and not realize it? Yeah, totally. And what about the great joy that happened in human sacrifice in many ancient cultures, and the idea that some good, great, liberating thing happened with that human sacrifice? What about the vast burning of witches, which were moms, which were women being burned, like tortured, but there is a righteous glee in that process? Okay, so we're pretty comfortable with the idea, or Nazism, which is like, there are plenty of people who are alive today who remember that. We're comfortable with the idea that it's possible for an entire culture to be insane, like have a completely batshit crazy set of ideas about things, and where there's something like a mental illness across the whole population, and not just insane, but criminally insane, right? The burning of witches, the lynching as a fun form of entertainment, the throwing of Christians to lions as a good Sunday activity for the family. Like, that's a criminal insanity, but is also just called culture. And so it's important to understand we will enculturate insanity where it seems normal. I would claim that ubiquitous jealousy of the type that we have in our culture is a type of low-grade subclinical ubiquitous psychopathology. And specifically, it's important to understand that it is the inverse coupling of my emotional state with other people's, binding us to a rivalrous relationship with each other. Now, the other side of this axis of reverse coupling, right? The jealousy, envy one is, I feel some pain, some pinch, some negativity at their joy, their win, their success. The other side is, I feel some joy at their pain. This is sadism. The German term Schadenfreude is, experiencing joy at the misery of others. Sadism, particularly, is experiencing joy at the misery of others, particularly when you have something to do with it. But I think most people are comfortable with the idea that of all of the emotional dispositions humans can inhabit, sadism is the one that is most problematic, right? It's the one that is most kind of bound to what we might think of as evil. You mean the person, well, they just didn't know they were causing harm. No, they did. Well, they felt that they had to cause harm. No, causing the harm was a terminal end in and of itself. They weren't doing it for some other reason. They just enjoy it. I don't know a better way to define evil than that, right? Like that's pretty fucked up. So it's important to understand that sadism is the other side of the same axis as jealousy. They're the same axis, right? They're the reverse coupling of my emotional state and yours. So I would say that this whole axis, which we can define as the rivalry axis, right? I have an inverse emotional relationship because I see you as fundamentally an enemy, fundamentally another, a bad guy or whatever. So I feel good at you getting hurt, you losing, you doing less well, etc. I feel bad at you getting ahead in any way. And you can see that in a tribal warfare conflict, maybe there was an evolutionary purpose for this. If there really was scarce food and we had tribal war over it, and I see that you actually got some more weapons and some more pigs and whatever, I feel scared and I feel bad because it was actually maybe going to go bad for us. And so we understand why people do in-group identification and outgrouping. And outgrouping makes it to where I can call somebody a Jew and then be happy gassing children in the millions, right? Because they're a Jew and they're so other and we make them bad. Or I can call them a terrorist, or I can call them a racist or a whatever, right? And if you look in current culture at how the left and right use outgrouping terms on each other, even just Republican or Democrat is an outgrouping term that has so much negative connotation to the other side. But conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, flat earther, whatever, commie, socialist, anti-patriot, that shit just has to stop, right? That tribal dynamic multiplied by exponential tech is a self-terminating thing. But you'll notice that there's a kind of righteous joy that people feel on both sides when they feel like they're winning and the other side is losing and they're sticking it to the other side, right? But the joy feels righteous. It actually feels moral. But so did the people burning the witches in the name of Jesus, right? And somehow in their mind, they got that in the name of Christianity and the following of Christ, and the guy who said, "Let he who has no sins amongst you cast the first stone," and emphasize forgiveness, we're going to torture these people to death. Somehow they twisted the shit in their mind to have that make sense, where it actually felt moral and righteous. Study Girard if you haven't studied Girard before, in terms of conflict theory and scapegoating. One particular form of outgrouping is scapegoating in particular. We have to transcend that Girardian thing. So what I would say is you've got this compassion compersion axis, and you've got this sadism jealousy axis. And I would say that feeling joy at the joy of others is a fundamentally healthier kind of joy to optimize for than just personal joy, because personal joy might be sadism and it might be sociopathic, right? It might mean that my joy is totally decoupled from yours. It might mean that my joy is actually at your expense. If it's on the compersive side, it means my desire to feel more joy requires helping other people. And if their desire to feel more joy requires helping other people, now there's this anti-rivalrous, symbiotic, cooperative development. So compersion is a subset of joy or happiness that is one that has the highest synergy and internalization of externalities and health that's associated. But I wouldn't want compersion without compassion, because I wouldn't want someone who were just spiritual bypassing happiness junkies who were just only like, "Oh, I'm happy at your happiness. You're sad. I need to move away from you and find someone else who's happy." I want people who can be with feeling compassion at the pain of others and moved by it and go help, right? If compersion is the only thing I want to feel, I don't want to be Mother Teresa. I don't want to go be with homeless people or sick people or whatever. But if I'm moved by this axis, right? If someone's hurting, I don't want to not be hurting. I don't want to not. Like when I'm feeling pain at the pain of the world, I don't feel bad about the pain I'm feeling. I feel like I would be mentally ill if I wasn't feeling it. So even though there is some pain at seeing the pain of the world, there's no inner conflict around it. So there's peace in it, right? Deeper than happiness is wholeness. And the sense that, like, if someone I really love dies, I don't want to be feeling ecstatic in that moment, like something's wrong with me. Like I want to be feeling a certain grief. And there's a beauty in the grief because there was someone that was so fucking beautiful that I got to know at all. Right. So there is a happiness, there's a beauty, there's a gratitude, and there's a loss, and there's reality. And when I'm feeling that, it feels right. It feels like the only thing that I should feel. There's no inner conflict. So we want happiness, but not as the only emotion. We want all of the emotions when they're appropriate, right? They all have a appropriate function. So here's my index that I would offer. How do we measure compersion? Well, it's very hard. So I'm offering this as a thought experiment. How do we measure compassion? It's very hard. How do we measure sadism and jealousy? So let's not deal with how we measure them for a moment. Let's just say we could. In a society, the total amount of activity on the compassion compersion axis divided by the total amount of activity on the sadism jealousy axis would be the index of the health of the society. The more of this one and the less of this one, right? A ratio of the total amount of human activity and human emotion on this axis versus this axis, emotionally coupled versus emotionally anti-coupled. And given that we want to not be doing the in-grouping, out-grouping thing because we have global effects and we can't just kind of be peaceful with our own in-group. We depend upon people in 6 continents because of our complex supply chains to make the stuff. This really has to become, rather than just an in-group metric, a civilization-wide metric. I would say, though, if you look at your own relationships, and you look at this metric, it's a pretty good measurement of the health of your relationships. If you were to look at a community of people, the degree to which the people are in kind of jealous, envy, competition with each other, not so good. The degree to which they can't be with the pain of each other, not so good. So obviously, to be with the pain of each other has to have not just a positive wiring, which is the compassion, but has to have enough strength and emotional resilience that I can be with the emotion, right? So we can see that to fulfill on these emotions requires a bunch of other things to be in place. To not be jealous of somebody else requires enough inner fulfillment that I'm not so desperate that I feel like I need the thing they have, right? And so you can see that to be able to fulfill on these, there's other foundational stuff like strength and wholeness of being. The first book I ever read that got me started thinking about these things really clearly was when I was a teenager, a book called The Way to Love by Anthony DeMello. I don't know if I've recommended that one here before. I love Anthony DeMello so much. He's a Jesuit priest, but he lived in India and liked Hindu philosophy, liked all the religious philosophies. I think him continuing to be a Jesuit was just like a respect and appreciation for a tradition he came from. It's a small little book of meditations, and they're basically all about how to cultivate a kind of wholeness that creates more of an unconditional happiness that allows you to be more virtuous. Because if my happiness is unconditional, if my happiness is very conditional, and my sense of peace is very conditional, then I have to be trying to rearrange the conditions of the world and trying to rearrange your behavior and everything else to fit meeting that hungry ghost inside of me. If I find a certain fulfillment in my relationship with life, with breath, with the trees, then what's in it for me stops being the primary driver, and I can actually be attentive to other things. So rather than happiness being the goal of life, I would say kind of an unconditional type of happiness or an unconditional type of peace is the beginning of life that is really worth living, where you aren't being run by what the Buddhists call the hungry ghost realm of what's in it for me as the primary driver. And that's when you can start paying attention to how interesting other people's experiences and how much is going on in the world, and not just what does everything mean for me, which is a fucking dreadful narcissistic hall of mirrors. And so the work to develop that wholeness as the basis of being able to see the world and be with it and live while you're here is fundamental. So I recommend the DeMello book. And yeah, that's the thing. That's the metric I wanted to propose. The compassion, compersion divided by the jealousy, sadism ratio. And now, of course, why does that metric fail? I could have people that really care and really give a shit and are so bad at rationality that they keep making the objectively wrong choice. So if I was to amend this metric with something, the first thing I would amend it with is I would multiply this metric by the rational and empirical quality of choice making. But see, then the rational choice would be a tool of utilitarian awareness in service to what was being defined by this metric, right? Which would be my desire for the happiness of all beings. would then be the thing I was using rationality to optimize. The other thing is, of course, if I have this for an in-group and not an out-group, I can still be sadist to the out-group and run arms races. The out-group has, when I say we have to have no out-group, that has to include other species. And so if we want to extend this further, have the mirror neuron thing not just be limited to sapiens, but all sentient beings. So if we say this thing, the compassion compersion axis is what we want to be on as much as we can and as little on this other axis, and empower that with good rationality and empiricism of what's really working and extend it to all sentient beings. I think that's a pretty solid metric for us to optimize for. And that's it. That was the thing I thought might be interesting and I wanted to share. And one other thing. Okay, so that sounds nice. Now this is a new thing that we can pretend is true for us when it's not true and create a shadow around. Okay, so I'm going to pretend to be compassionate, even though I'm actually feeling some Schadenfreude when somebody else is hurting, because I was told this was a good virtue and people like good virtue. So I'm going to pretend to be this way because really I'm just trying to get other people to like me, because I'm still basically in the empty what's in it for me place, and other people liking me because they think I'm a virtuous person is what's motivating my behavior. All right. As long as you have the empty, hungry ghost realm, what's in it for me thing running you, you can't do virtue. You just can't. You can only run the simulation of it. So what does it take to overcome that? This is why I like that DeMello book so much. It's why I like the Buddhist practices. And ultimately, do I really even hold the fucking virtue? Do I hold the value where really I'm developing it because I care about it? But whether anybody else ever knows about it or not, like I care about it. My own sense of inner integrity and respect of myself matters. Or am I happy to virtue signal this thing? Because really what's driving me is the childhood insecurity and feeling of I'm not enough and nothing's enough, and I need to compensate by having other people love me and like me and praise me and whatever. So I will do virtue just like I might do money or sexiness or humor or whatever it is as a compensation method for being able to get some kind of something from other people in the world. So there's a question of like, okay, so we just defined a virtue worth holding, but now how does one congruently develop the virtue versus just jump straight to the performative behavior of the virtue? You think about it enough to think about how fucking miserable a life any other way is that you become so disgusted with your own behavior of that type that you have to stop it. And you become so inspired and enheartened and motivated by the beauty of the other thing that you're inspired to work at it. And you have an internal congruency between what you actually believe and what you're willing to train yourself and base your life on. And then you know that the other thing is still conditioned in you, and pretending it's not there doesn't help. So, okay, I feel jealousy. Well, sometimes when it's time to work out, I feel lazy. I don't have to pretend that I never feel lazy. I don't have to super shame myself for it, but I also don't not work out, right? Like it's, okay, so I'm feeling lazy. That's okay. I accept that feeling's arising, and I'm going to go get some caffeine and I'm going to go to the gym. And it's like, I can notice it and I can still choose a higher path rather than choose that path, right? Because as you have low energy, you don't choose to do the things that generate more energy, and there's a downward cycle. So if instead you choose to do the thing that takes energy but generates energy, there's an upward cycle. And this is kind of like the essence of being able to notice something and then make a higher choice. Maybe I'm feeling some sadism. Maybe I'm feeling like an actual kind of someone pissed me off so much, I'm like have a vengeance sense. If I pretend that I don't and I try to stuff that away, it'll come out when I get upset enough, right? And I'll blow up and I'll be a not safe person, or it'll eke out in subtle ways where I'll subtly undermine people. So I have to look at all that shit. So I'm a big fan of therapy, by the way, good therapy. I'm not a big fan of types of therapy that aren't effective, but I've done something like 1,000 therapy sessions in my life. Started young, kind of did it intensely. Fisher Hoffman work, Gestalt work, Jungian work, RAT, primal scream, rebirthing, whatever, name all the things. Because in the same way of doing a lot of meditation, a lot of study, it's like meditation works on a level of self. Different types of meditations do different things, but maybe I'm developing my ability to concentrate, to quiet the mind. That doesn't mean that the thoughts that when they do arise in the mind are healthier. That's in the domain of psychology, of how do I work through where the thought patterns arise from and what the patterns of thought are. And neither of those give me the benefit of studying, where I'm learning new skills. So these are different dimensions of the self that are all worth working on, because you not just are happier, but you are also more capable of showing up more meaningfully. So if anybody has a stigma around therapy where it's like, that's for fucked up people, let that go. It's you invest in what you care about. And if you care about having the clearest psyche you can, so you can be the most whole vessel for service to the world, then invest in it. And you can do it on your own. You can read DeMello, get the principles, and then get a process like Byron Katie's The Work and kind of work on your own. That's great. There's lots of processes like that, but having help with it also, like, okay, hey, I have a lot of jealousy. That's a thing that's in there. Because it's not the thing I respect, I want to work to shift it, but I'm not going to I'm going to have the type of shame around it that says I don't want to indulge it, but I'm not going to have the type of shame that makes me pretend it isn't there so I can't work on it, because I ultimately recognize I didn't program it in myself. Right? Had I been raised in a Buddhist culture, I would be different. So I don't really have any shame in the fact that it was programmed, but I also have a value system that it doesn't align with. And so I don't want to let it stay in me. So I want to work to shift it. But in order to work to shift it, I have to be honest about it, be willing to look at it and do the work on it. Right? So there's a kind of shame that empowers us, and there's a kind that doesn't, right? There's a kind that says, oh, I actually value something else, and I want to be more aligned with my own values. So it empowers the agency to work on something. There's another kind that just makes you feel defeated, and then you usually do more of the negative thing because it's a coping strategy for pain, and pain comes when you're defeated. So, there's a way of contemplating your values where you're like, yeah, I don't live in the fullest relationship with my values I could, because I've come to these values through my own reflection on things, but I was programmed in a different way. I was encultured and conditioned in a different way. And I don't need to feel shamed about what me as a little infant was conditioned in, what me as a little kid was conditioned in, but I also don't want to keep it being that. I don't want to keep being the result of my birth and my unconscious early time. Once I reflect on my values, I want to work to bring myself into more conscious alignment with it. And so I do feel a certain healthy kind of pride when I notice that I'm making progress, that my behavior and my experience is more aligned with my values. And there's a healthy kind of shame I feel when it's not, which is basically just saying, no, I actually value my own values. And I know that I'm actually not doing the very best that I could with this, so I'm going to work on it. About virtue development for its sake, because you actually think about it, versus virtue signaling. The thing about virtue signaling that's such a bitch is that it destroys other people's belief in the reality of virtue. Because when people see a virtue signaled enough times and it's not real, they stop believing it anywhere, and then they just kind of go nihilist, and then often kind of sociopathic as a result of the nihilism. I so much more appreciate when someone's really coming from what's in it for me. Like, I appreciate it being explicit, right? Like Cardi B, Jeffrey Epstein, whatever style. Like, I'm fucking in this for me. I'm like, awesome. At least we know what we're getting. Like, and some people will be fine with that and they'll go along with it. So I want to see relationships where, so another metric we could add is that it's not just the state of compassion, compersion relative to jealousy, empathy. It's also an evolutionary metric that this relative to this is increasing, right? This is increasing and this is decreasing. And in order for that to happen, there's the healthy kind of authentic communication about it that allows us to understand the dynamics and help each other. All right, I think that's it. Curious if there are any questions on that.
And so much goodness that was just presented. That compersion thing is just blowing my mind still. Yeah, we have a lot of questions in the chat. We might not get to all of them, but yeah, let's take an Elliot first. Elliot, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate this. And so trying to find the question itself. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the difference between having this social health index and developing incentive structures or systems which encourage the movement towards an optimized society that expresses these values in actuality.
Incentives are why people virtue signal. An incentive is intrinsically an extrinsic motivation. So if I'm incentivized to do X, what it means is something other than X that I want is given to me for doing X, right? Some Y that I want, a gold star, a dollar, a piece of recognition, a trophy. And so what it means is I really want Y, but I'll do X because somebody else gives me Y. I can't develop virtue that way. I can develop a behavior, but I can't develop an internal congruency. This is one of the things that's so tricky, is how do you help develop what people actually feel and want, not just their performance or their behavior? And I can't use reward and punishment to condition someone's interior states and their reality. So you cannot cause people to feel a thing. I mean, you can make it more likely. You can nurture it. And this is different. Like good parenting is, there's no algorithm for it, right? Sometimes the kid is expressing the jealousy thing and you just listen to find out what's going on and find out where the kind of feeling of emptiness is and work with it. Sometimes you teach them a lesson. Sometimes you share where you feel jealous, right? Sometimes you, and what is the right thing to do? Marshall Rosenberg said something I really loved. He said, when it came to parenting, he said, stop just asking what behavior you want your kids to do and start thinking more about what do I want their why to be for doing it. And if I want their why to be that I'm afraid of getting punished if I don't, and that I need my parents' conditional love and approval, so I will do it to get the conditional love and approval, okay, then keep using those methods. But if you want their why to be that they intrinsically care about certain things and that they have values that are meaningful to them, that they're willing to invest in and sacrifice for and whatever, how do you nurture that? It's a deeper question, right? So when you said incentives or structures, so I was picking on the incentive part to say one of the things I'm looking for as another health index of society is the ratio of intrinsic motivation that moves people to extrinsic motivation is another health metric. The higher percentage of human behavior that is motivated by extrinsic motives is the more people are going against themselves or having to kind of go against themselves because of some external structures that are force functioning them to do that, or where there's internal conflict in them. Einstein didn't do what he did because people were paying him for it. And Mozart didn't do what he did because people were paying him for it. And Jane Goodall didn't. And the things that we find most beautiful in people is an intrinsic arising. Now, the labor force forever has been a situation where civilization has needed most people to do shitty jobs for lots of hours to make civilization work. So how do we get people to do that? Well, if the jobs need the people, then either the state has to force the people, and we would think of that as totalitarianism, or we have this liberal democracy idea that will let the market force them by creating a symmetry where the jobs need the people. So let's make it to where the people need the jobs. And so we think of that decentralized system of incentive as a good thing because it gets all the stuff done and seems a little bit more free. Robotic automation is about to overturn that whole thing. robotic and AI automation. And either it's going to create a world where those robots are owned by a few people, all the wealth is concentrated, and it's a way more fucked world in terms of wealth inequality with a massive useless class. Or we realize that by ending the idea that we need a lot of extrinsic motivation, because there's a bunch of shitty jobs that the humans have to do, that we can procedurally, the easiest jobs to automate are the ones that are the most rote, which are the ones that humans enjoy the least. And the things that humans enjoy more are the harder ones to automate because they involve more creative process, more intelligence, etc. So how do we move to an economy that is more based on people having commonwealth access to the things that they need? So rather than what do I need to get, the whole idea also that if you don't have an extrinsic motive system like capitalism, you get a fucked up welfare state. It's just gibberish. That's only once you've ruined people. Put Einstein on welfare, put Mozart on welfare, put Jane Goodall on welfare, put Jimmy Carter on welfare. Awesome. What the fuck are they doing? Those are not ruined people. Those are people who are connected to the meaningfulness of their life. Well, when kids are when they're kids and they're asking why, what is that? What is that? What is that? And they're curious about everything. And we don't answer any of their questions well. And we don't facilitate their interest in life. And then we try to force them to be interested in shit that they aren't interested in. We break their interest in life. And then they just want a hypernormal stimuli. And so then you have to extrinsically motivate them to do shit, because from the beginning, you've been extrinsically motivating them to do that shit and not following their intrinsic motive. Well, and then we do social science on a people who've been ubiquitously conditioned that way and call it human nature. It's not human nature. It's ubiquitous social conditioning. And so this is my rant against incentive. Of course, temporarily, while everybody are incentive junkies, because we've ruined everybody in this way, we have to make better systems of incentive that are less perverse. But we also have to be working on moving from incentive to an entire culture that is focused on facilitating the intrinsic motivation of everyone. Now, when people have as their emotional state this compassion compersion axis, their intrinsic motivation will also involve benefiting everyone, right? In whatever way, whether it's through their art or their nurturance or their craftsmanship or their science or their whatever it is. So then the question, how do we nurture and condition the growth of that in other people? That's a great question. How do we condition it in new children is a very good question. How do we condition adults who've already been really affected? I started by saying, this is why I like psychotherapy, right? Is because you have to change your psyche. You have to be able to notice what are the patterns in the psyche. You have to be able to look at where they arose from, and you have to be able to consciously start working at shifting some of recognizing that consciously you value certain things that are not how you were programmed to be. So how do you take those unconscious programs, make them conscious, and work to be able to shift them to have more alignment and congruence? In general, the question, how do we as individuals and how do we as parents and how do we as educators and how do we as people wanting to steward communities and civilizations condition the growth of virtue of any kind in people? Condition real inner growth rather than just external behavior is a centrally good question, one that we could take another Stoa for, and one that I know some things, and it's maybe the topic I wish I knew better answers to than I do, more than anything else.
Thank you. So many follow-ups, but a lot of other folks waiting. So thank you.
So much goodness here. Khalil, you had a question that got a lot of plus ones. If you could unmute yourself.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Daniel. That was amazing. And thanks, Peter, for having this event. This is somewhat of a personal question. So answer it at your liberty. So my brief survey of people suggests that the ones who feel higher, connected to a higher power, don't have the existential fear that precludes the ability to love. You can say that their cup runneth over. Is this connection to a transcendent power necessary for radical transformation today? And do you have it? Do you have a connection to a transcendent power?
To a transcendent reality, yes. Transcendent to any particular reality as I can define it. And I'm not going to call it power. There are problems with that word. And so again, if you are interested, read that document I wrote called The Dance of the Tao and the 10,000 Things. I think one of the ways that we fuck up the most is by trying to take the transcendent and bring it back into the non-transcendent, that which transcends conceptuality, and then we try to conceptualize it so we can have certainty about it. So I don't know if this is historically true. I have heard this narrative and I like it, whether it's true or not. So I'll give the example here. The story here was that early Jews said that it had a recognition that the reality that we think of as God, that they could think of as the transcendent, the absolute, was important to not have a word to describe it. Because the moment you had a word, it wasn't every other word. It wasn't, there was something more associated than other things less associated. And that would actually mess us up conceptually. So that when they were talking and they wanted to reference that, they would reference it with a few moments of silence. They would actually say, instead of coming to God and saying God or higher power, whatever, they would just close their eyes and take a few moments of silence and try to, in feeling, access a sense of the transcendent that is trans-conceptual and trans-linguistic. Whether this is true or not, I fucking love this story. I love the idea of communicating that way. And that words, there's a symbol grounding. There's a symbol to represent a ground, but the idea of that which is transcendent isn't a ground. It is that which is beyond any particular ground, right? So I don't want a symbol for it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a relationship with it. It means that it's trans-symbolic, right? And that the idea was that when they converted that spoken pattern into writing, just leaving a space, sometimes it was hard to tell how big the space was and was it really a space between the words or not. And so they needed a placeholder. So what did they put as a placeholder? To be unspeakable. And that so they picked the letters in the Hebrew alphabet that were the most impossible to pronounce in relationship with each other. That JHWH was an unpronounceable set of letters. And so they weren't to represent a name, they were to represent the unspeakable, the ineffable. And so that when you were reading and you saw JHWH, you just held silence. It was a placeholder for that. And that when that was translated later, the vowel diacritics of either Latin or Greek or the other languages came in, and that's how we got Jehovah or Yahweh from it as a name, which kind of violated the whole purpose of the thing. Like I said, I have not verified if that's historically true, but it is metaphorically a true, meaningful set of ideas. Einstein said, it's an optical delusion of consciousness to believe there are separate things. And that in reality, there is a one thing or oneness that we call universe. Well, it seems like there are separate things. It seems like I'm separate than you and separate from this tree over here. And kind of. But if I think about me without thinking about the planet, if I removed the planet, what would I be? Well, I wouldn't exist at all. If I removed the sun, what would I be? I wouldn't exist at all. If I removed the center of the galaxy, I wouldn't exist at all. If I removed the electromagnetic field or the Higgs boson, I wouldn't exist at all. So I completely depend on heaps of things that I don't include in my definition of self, which means that my definition of self is just badly defined, and my definition of everything else is badly defined. So when you really get this, you realize they are not separate things. There are boundaries that have some distinction of one interconnected reality where none of it would exist without all of it. So that all of it, there's a relationship with that is possible, but it's trans-semantic and it's trans-belief. It's beyond a specific proposition to say this proposition is true or not true. Because belief has to be defined in terms of a propositional logic, which is defined in terms of semiotics. This is deeper than that. So the Tao that is speakable is not the eternal Tao, but there is a relationship one can have with it. It's ineffable. So if someone has a relationship with that ultimate reality, that which we'd reference with silence, that if we were going to call it something, we would call it life with a capital L or reality with a capital R or whatever it is, then I see everything else as a unique expression of that one reality, a unique facet of that one reality. And because it's a part of the ultimate reality, it's sacred. And because it's a unique part, it's completely irreplaceably sacred. So then when I'm perceiving, what am I perceiving? I'm perceiving the whole of reality beyond anything I can conceptualize, that is the basis of what makes everything I love and value possible, expressed in a form and in a unique form. And the person in front of me is a form that has never been in universe and will never be again like this. And I have a moment to interact with a completely unique possibility of experience. I think when someone really gets this, and you'll see in DeMello's book, this deep kind of like the relationship with the transcendent isn't I believe in a God, which is just I made up an imaginary friend in my head to comfort myself. And because I believe in that God, I can torture people in his name. I can be more interested in the God in my head than the real humans in front of me or the trees or the life in front of me. So it's very possible to have a very pathological relationship to a transcendent function. I want a transcendence and an eminence together, right? That which transcends every form is also eminently expressing through every form. So then all life is sacred. So then harming life is sin. And the highest thing I could want, a relationship with the transcendent, is available through every possibility, every moment, every possibility. When Gibran said it was in meditation upon the dewdrop that I discovered the mysteries of the ocean. So now the hungry ghost realm is gone when, like, say you do mushrooms and you go outside and you look at some trees. Anyone who's done mushrooms and got to look at trees has had this experience. And I'm not talking like 10 grams of mushrooms where the tree is dissolving and, whatever. I'm talking like a gram of mushrooms. You're out there and you have this experience that the tree is so beautiful that you can't imagine having enough time in your whole life to really appreciate it. Like it would be worth your whole life to just appreciate the beauty of it. And you're wondering, how the fuck did I miss this tree? It's in my front yard. I've walked by it a million times and I've never really seen it. But if someone asked you to describe it, you'd say the same thing still. Like the leaves are green and the bark is brown except why is it so much more beautiful, even though optically it hasn't changed? Because 100% of your attention is with it. Because one of the things the mushrooms are doing is kind of retarding the other cortical functions that have you lost in, but I need to be doing something else and a laundry list and narrative and other thoughts. And so when all of your attention is kind of in the sensory process, you're able to really see the tree. But this is also the just kind of mystical, eminent experience that St. Francis and everybody talks about, of seeing the overwhelming beauty of reality and the numinous expressed through form, right? So I go outside and I look at the trees and I watch the way all the leaves are moving and on all the trees and in relationship to the way the clouds are moving. And I'm just awed by it, right? Like it's just exquisitely beautiful. And And I'm like, man, I could have been born on a planet where vision wasn't a thing, or where I only got to see in black and white as opposed to all this color, or not born at all, just no experience. And the depth of this experience, just the amazingness of experience at all, of something rather than nothing at all, of the beauty that's here is so fucking epic, is so infinitely precious compared to nothing. I would choose to incarnate, if I got the choice, to this life and all the difficulties of this life just to experience this, just to get to have this experience of color and motion with this tree in the sky. And I've had this experience so many times where I'm listening to music, I'm watching a tree, I'm making love, I'm whatever it is. And I'm like, fuck, experience is so incredible that I would incarnate my whole life for this moment. And when you take that seriously and contemplate it, you're like, man, I've had so many moments that are worth a whole life already. I've had thousands of lifetimes worth of incarnating for. And I'm still run by what's in it for me. Did I not pay attention? Like, and when I kind of get that, then there's like the rest of like having any more amazing experiences is just gravy. And the fact that they keep happening is amazing. And they're also available any moment I actually pay attention, right? It was in meditation upon the dewdrop that I discovered the mysteries of the ocean. And there's always a dewdrop in every moment, right? There's always a expression of reality I can pay enough attention to. The way Rilke in Letters to a Young Poet in the first letter talked about, and if you can find no inspiration in reality, even go to your memories, right? That even just in the memory of the experience, there's enough to find exaltation, to move by. So this is the answer to the hungry ghost realm. And it is a transcendent, but it's a transcendent and eminent, right? It's both the transcendence into that which is beyond all achievement and form, and then the embodiment of it. How do we move higher into spirit and then spirit expressed through form? Spirit, what does that mean? You get the idea, right? And do I think that is necessary? Yes. Do I think it requires something like believing in a God? I usually think that gets in the way, because you have converted the transcendent to a semiotic proposition to believe in or not believe in. That was a mistake. That was an impulse towards the thing. And then actually having the reality of that which is beyond definition trying to get captured by the definition part, having the comfort with infinite unknowability get turned into trying to have certainty about a thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Cleo. Definitely compelled to do shrooms now after the session. Do you have one more time for one more question, Daniel?
Sure.
Cool. Margaret, you're up next.
Well, thanks, Peter. Thank you, Daniel. This is resonating, to say the least. So my question is about energy dynamics. And I'm wondering how you view the energy dynamics of people escaping the gravity well of anger and jealousy on that anger, jealousy, compassion, compersion axis. Because there's, in the short term, a seductive incentive around anger and the gross availability of energy that becomes available when you're dwelling in that place. I really like the way Michael Jordan talks about it in The Last Dance, of how he would generate these conflict scenarios in order to fuel his playing. It's like a really nice example of how we do that. So I'm wondering, how might we invite individuals to direct their energy towards moving in the direction of compersion and compassion, knowing that it's a pretty high activation cost?
I think when you take the examples, Michael Jordan is a good one, and you look at the Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Conor McGregor kind of energy. I'm the greatest. I'm going to beat the shit out of them, whatever it is. we realized that it's effective to upregulate certain types of capacities. What you notice is that what each of those people are doing is mostly embodied animal behaviors, right? We're talking about sports in a body. And that it's very important, because what we're talking about is a very primitive set of emotions. The fight energy out of fight, flight, freeze. The fight energy is the upregulation of certain kind of neuroendocrinology that activates fast twitch muscle fibers and activates glycolysis and stuff, right? So if I'm literally talking about hitting and running, that thing works. But that same sympathetic nervous system activation and adrenalization decreases prefrontal cortical activity, decreases the capacity for most rationality, design, empathy. So you don't see Einstein doing the Conor McGregor energy, because it wouldn't work. It would actually make him suck at the thing he was doing. And so it's important to get that thing works for activating a evolutionary fight process in a body to increase muscle activity. And now there's a lot of other emotions that go along with those hormones, but those emotions don't actually make you better at other functions. And very much in the way that a high person, high on pot, is blown away at how good their ideas are, and their ideas totally suck because their high brain is interpreting them. And the sober people around them are like, man, those are not good ideas. In the same way, the person who's high on the endocrinology of anger might think that the way they're thinking about strategy to solve social problems is good because they feel activated, but it's not good. It's bad strategy. And it's why it usually produces really shitty results. And the much better results happen from people who can do much clearer minded thinking, which is why when it comes to activism and social strategy, where people are upset and they're traumatized, I want a space for trauma healing. And then I want a space for strategy, and they're not the same thing. And the trauma energy ends up making shitty strategy that ends up being self-destructive, even to the goals in the long term, though it seems fulfilling in the short term. And that thing of like, yeah, but like, you know, when you're really angry, you want to say the thing before you calm down. There's a party that's like, I should calm down and not say the thing right now. But there's a party that's like, yeah, but I don't want to be calm. I always let myself be calm. I want to say the fucking thing. And then you say it and then you regret it. And you're like, why did I say the thing? Why didn't I calm down? There's an autopoetic energy. Any energy that we get into, it's almost like that. Peter would call it a daemon, right? That daemon, or that neurological process wants to keep living. It wants to act. It has a momentum to it. This is why there's a question of, do we have a witness and do we have a set of higher order values? Because all of those different momentums in us want to keep acting, and they're not all worth letting keep acting, right? So addiction is a very good example. If I'm coming down off heroin, I don't give a shit about anything other than getting another hit. I don't want sunsets. I don't want a friend. I don't want to hold hands. I don't want to learn some new thing. I don't want to help homeless people. I want to fucking hit, because nothing else is going to make me not feel terrible, because I have so conditioned myself to that particular hypernormal stimuli that nothing else will do. And if I do the short-term thing that makes me feel better, I'm probably going to die on the thing, right? Because that short-term thing that makes me feel better also increases the addiction. And I now keep needing the heroin relative to anything else. And the thing about addiction is it gives you a spike and then it gives you a crash. The crash makes you need a spike again. And as you keep doing the crashes and spikes, your baseline erodes. That's essential to the addictive process on any addiction. Whereas with healthy process, if I work out or I eat some healthy food, I don't get anywhere near as big a spike instantly as I do from the chocolate cake or the heroin or the gambling or the whatever it is. In fact, it might even be kind of not that fun in the moment. But then I have increased health, endurance, capacity, whatever, as I keep doing it. And so my baseline increases over time, and I actually start to get a reward circuit associated with noticing progress. And so I'll get a reward, but it's a different nature of a reward. It doesn't have the same nature of crashes, and it has a difference in the change of baseline. So this is the 2 marshmallow experiment, right? The kids that didn't do well at the 2 marshmallow experiment didn't do well at the most of the rest of life. And so there's a question of, do we have the ability to do impulse control over short-term shit and be more focused on long-term advantage? All environmental harm is short-term focus at long-term expense. Almost all war is, it seems, in the short-term best interest, while not recognizing that we're driving arms races that make worse wars that will go kill way more people worse in the future. We get so focused on, how do I make this political win because my side has to win this 4 years, not realizing that the next 4 years will swing harder the opposite way. They'll utilize whatever tools of propaganda we developed and make better versions, and then they'll undo whatever we did for these 4 years, and we're stuck in the fucking cycle. And the thing we're doing for the short-term win is driving enmity of the other group and increasing their capacities. So getting out of the short-term reactivity process to be able to say, what is a long-term goal worth having, and how do I actually become in better service of it, is necessary for anything worthwhile. So then the question, how do I become a 2 marshmallow kid if I'm a 1 marshmallow kid? Meditation, where you don't scratch your nose when it itches. It's a great example, right? Where you sit up straight, and when you want to move, you don't. For 15 minutes until the bell goes, your body's going to stay straight. And when you want to itch your nose, you don't itch it. And you hold the mantra, and your mind wanders. And when it wanders, you bring it back to the mantra. And it wanders, you bring it back to the mantra. What are you doing? You're developing increased agency over your own self and increased impulse control to not have to itch the thing, to not have to move. You take cold showers. And even though you don't want to get in the cold fucking shower, you do it anyways. And then you consciously relax your shoulders when they want to tense up. And you take those impulsive processes and develop more agency over them. You work out when you don't feel like working out, and you develop positive reward circuits on it. More than anything, hang out with other people that are 2 marshmallow people rather than hang out with other people that are 1 marshmallow people. Because as social creatures, the people we're around condition us the fastest. And until you have conditioned yourself to be 2 marshmallow, you can't help other people be. So you might as well be around people that can help you until you stabilize it, then you can help other people. But there is a place, and this is where I said the healthy shame comes in. This is where I said, like, I get, when I read the DeMello, I got so disgusted with myself thinking about, like, he had these inquiries into what is love. It's like, when I say I love somebody, what I mostly mean is I like the way that I feel when they behave specific ways. And if they don't behave those specific ways, I'm willing to punish them. I'm willing to hurt them into behaving those ways through fear and guilt and shame and emotional manipulation of various kinds. And we call that I love you. Well, it's actually fucking disgusting. It's not love. It's like some weird cannibalism or addiction. And thinking about it that clearly was very helpful to me to be like, actually, I would rather be with no one than do that. Like, I'm so disgusted at myself for that. I would just rather be with no one. I would actually, the samurai thing, I'd rather kill myself. If I can't get past that, I don't need to keep doing this thing. I can fucking get past that. Like, I know that I can get past that thing and do better, but it's going to take some work, but I'm willing to work at it. So there's a place also where I think about enough, I can't behave that way and respect myself. I must actually be able to respect myself, to feel an integrity with myself. So I'm willing to just step away from the job, the relationship, whatever it is, and work on myself enough to come into alignment with my own self. And that's what I would call like a depth of congruency, where one starts taking the meaningfulness of their life seriously. I don't know if that helped.
Those are all useful ways to transition from being a 1 marshmallow kid to a 2 marshmallow kid. I guess I'm more curious about less on the individual level, because I think that once, like you said, once you recognize that within yourself, there is this intrinsic motivation to be doing that work, that practice constantly. That's like a lifelong thing. I guess I'm more curious about how do we, aside from literal embodiment of being a 2 marshmallow kid and developing that in oneself, how do we invite others to develop those same internal intrinsic motivations, knowing that the activation energy to get to 2 marshmallow, like 2 marshmallow state, is quite high, and that there is, when you sit down in meditation and you don't move to itch your nose, you fail a few thousand times before you actually sit there and don't itch. So more like, how do we support that place of fumbling before you see the ramp up of actually getting a effect from your actions? And
yeah. So
also,
go ahead.
can I just throw on a second question there too, is in terms of distinction between short-term and long-term, I'm curious if you have any temporal scale of what you're thinking of as long-term.
How long-term depends upon the actual kind of causal cycles associated with the dynamic. If I am thinking of cutting down a forest, how long will it take for that forest to regrow the complexity of it? If I'm thinking about kind of mowing down a hemp field, it'll regrow in a year. If it's an old growth forest, it'll take 1,000 years. So the time scales involve thinking about what is affected and how is it affected. And so there's a various range of time scale. It's different for different activity.
What about for a healthy civilization?
Well, it depends on, a civilization has choices, like do we cut down trees or not versus do we cut down hemp fields or not. Like I have to be thinking. So the 7 generations is a nice idea because it has us go far enough ahead that we think more creatively than we're kind of habitually likely to do. Typically, we're mostly going to think about ourselves and maybe our kids' life because of the thing we're automatically connected to. So 7 generations or 1,000-year timeline is a good timeline to think about. Obviously, you'll be able to think a lot more granularly about a 100-year timeline, and you'll be able to think more granularly about a 10-year timeline. So there's a whole scope of timelines to think about. Ultimately, how do we support the thriving of all life in perpetuity, right? Perpetuity is as far as I can sense it, as best I can sense, what is aligned with the thriving of life is the time scale where I kind of start and then back up from there. Now, the question you asked about not how do I become more aligned, which is what I thought you were asking, but how do I support other people? And that is more aligned with Elliot's question of how do we effectively support the development of values, virtue, psychological development, mindfulness, etc., in other people, and particularly at scale? If that's the question, I would say it's funny. My sense is that Buddha and Krishnamurti and everybody of that type struggled with this question more than just about anything else. Like, man, how do we help more people get this thing? It's kind of a hard thing to do. And you can see that none of them succeeded as much as they might have liked, but also didn't succeed none. And so we can see, is it possible to create like a Buddhist culture where, based on how the children are growing up, it's a lot of things. It's the educational system, but it's the way the parents are. It's the way that not just the parents, but the other people in town and even what the kids are being exposed to in terms of media, that all of that is a part of it. It's they're learning Tonglen from the time they're little. So one of the things I do is when I think of any particular virtue, I try to look at the culture that developed it the best as a positive deviant and see how did they do it. And then try to see, because they weren't doing it in 1 or 2 people. It wasn't kind of a spontaneous thing. It was, that culture actually did a pretty good job. Like Jews did a good job of a high level of academic education across the whole population. Buddhists and Jainists did a pretty good job of nonviolence across the whole population. So then I try and see like, well, what did they do culturally that brought that about? And which set of those things could be synthesized to make a culture? Anthony DeMello wrote some books and gave a lot of talks and lectures and worked with people. And I think that helped, made a church that worked with people, every Sunday and all week long. I think the idea of like, well, can I make a blockchain type system that makes a better system of incentives so that even if it's still extrinsic motive, I'm at least not extrinsically motivating people to the most pathological behavior and thus kind of conditioning sociopathy. And then that's a good way of thinking about it. Can we move out of a two-party system that forces the primary event in media to be a rivalry and narrative warfare driving camps against each other that is conditioning almost the worst thing in people, using their deepest kinds of fears and emotional hijacks? Could we make a system that did something better than that? So there's like system level answers. We look at Facebook, and if it's optimizing for time on site, and people spend more time on site when they're limbically hijacked because consciously they don't want to spend that much time on site, and they spend more time on site when their bias is being confirmed because they're going to spend less time on their biases when they're hitting cognitive dissonance, then of course a piece of technology that is using all the internet's information and AI optimization to double down on people's bias, tribal identity, and limbic hijacking is kind of the way Tristan Harris talks about collective downgrading, right? That's kind of a collective downgrading using exponential tech. Could we use the same exponential tech in a collective upgrading that was actually doing like personalized education, factoring all that personalized data for people to present education in the most compelling ways unique to them that they would find most interesting, including even things like media literacy and mindfulness stuff that made them more sovereign even to that system. So I think the answer, there's like, what can I do to help my friends and family? There's what can I do at a community level? There's what can I do if I'm an artist, a technologist, someone who runs social institutions? Lots of different things.
Thank
I don't know
you.
if that helps better.
That did help better, and I will stop asking follow-up questions because I can see Peter glaring at me. So thank you, Daniel.
Yep.
Thank you, Margaret. So we passed the bottom of the hour, so perhaps it's best to close here. Daniel, perhaps you're coming in next week, I think, or the week after on existential risk. Any kind of closing thoughts on today's session and maybe setting up that one?
I didn't get to read the comments as they were coming in because I can't do both things well, so I stayed focused. I'd be very curious to see questions and thoughts. I'll see if before the window closes I can read some of them, because I'm curious how this model resonates with people. Resonates very deeply with me, and then I'm curious how it resonates with other people. And if it does, I'd be very curious how the Stoa community as a community of practice might actually answer the question that both Elliot and Margaret were kind of asking of how do we support others? How do we support each other to say, is there a community of practice that we could have that helped in this particular way? I could even imagine something like taking the DeMello's book, doing a book club with it, and then having some kind of small group or dyadic practices to be able to share reflections and insights and something along those lines.
Yeah, I definitely feel called to have a session after this with the Stoa community to kind of like sense make and discuss, and perhaps a community of practice can emerge. I really loved the model that you presented, and so many freaking threads and thoughts are coming up for me, and I imagine a lot of others in the room as well. And I will save the chat and email it your way so you have a chance to read it at your leisure. Cool. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Daniel, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa, my friend. That was a great session.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for being here.
And as mentioned, Daniel's coming back on June 9th for Psychological Pitfalls, Engaging with Extras and Civilization Redesign. It's another Patreon event at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Dave Snowden is coming back again to doing a session called HR Bullshit on July 15th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. That should be really fun. And yeah, a big event, Noam Chomsky and ContraPoints, the future of the left. They're going to have a conversation on June 28th at 6 p.m. Eastern time, another Patreon Stoa event. So you can check that out, thestoa.ca. Daniel, everyone, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today.